Steps to screen out potential tenants for rental property. As a landlord, taking the time to screen out potential tenants can be time-consuming. However, taking the time to do this process will be beneficial to the landlord. This video will explain tenant background checks, tenant credit reports, and criminal search. Incorporating these procedures and techniques as a standard process will give landlords the insight on the future tenant's past behavior. A landlord has the option to perform a rental background check on a potential tenant. Before a landlord performs a rental background check, the tenant has to be aware of the process. The landlord can include in their application a section where the tenant has to have signature of consent to perform background check. According to specific states and cities, don't allow landlords to be included during the potential tenant screening process. Even if so, the landlords can use tenant screening services. Typically, the tenant screening providers include criteria for sharing credit reports, tenant criminal background checks, and rental history report. These reports come as a fee for landlords depending on the company and the screening data reports. Although, background checks are a measure of a person's safety. Credit reports are a measure of a person's financial responsibility. Nevertheless, processing both reports would give the landlord option towards choosing a highly qualified tenant. Processing a tenant background checks. Tenant background check can be used as a tool for a landlord. This process will give a landlord insight into the potential tenant's past behavior and to ensure they're reliable renters. When a landlord decides to use a tenant screening service, the screening service will have access to government databases such as the three major credit bureaus. 3 major credit bureaus. 1. Equifax. 2. TransUnion. 3. Experian. These tenant screening services have to comply with FCRA, Fair Credit Reporting Act. The FTC, Federal Trade Commission, ensures that the FCRA carries out to proper standard. As a landlord, ensure to do the research when choosing a tenant screening service. Please validate that your screening service of choice is compliant with the Fair Credit Reporting Act, FCRA. Bonus tips: landlords reporting delinquent tenants' payment activity. Most landlords are unable to report tenants' delinquent payment history directly to the 3 major credit bureaus. In order for a landlord to report delinquent tenants' payment deposits directly to the credit bureaus, the landlord has to generate a high volume of payment records to report to the credit bureaus. For instance, TransUnion requires landlord or property owner to have 100 or more accounts before reporting tenants' delinquent payments. Choosing the right collection agency for unpaid debt. Nonetheless, the best option for the landlord or property owner is to choose to have a collection agency collect the debt generated by the tenant. The collection agency will report the debt that tenant produces to the credit bureau on the landlord's behalf. If the landlord chooses for the collection agency to work on their behalf to collect unpaid debt due to tenant's negligence, the collection agency will charge a flat fee or percentage of the unsettled debt. Landlord, please ensure that the collection agency of your choice reports to the 3 major credit bureaus. Filing a collection account will have a great effect on the tenant's credit score. As a result, the tenants will have a difficult time being qualified as a potential renter in the future. Criminal background checks are vital to a landlord. If a landlord decides to let a tenant screening service conduct a criminal background check report, the landlord is responsible for using the report as its sole purpose for housing. In other words, the landlord should not use the report as anything other than the purpose of business. Using the report to verify the tenant's claims of being responsible for their past behavior with actions and transactions. In contrast, if a landlord decides to have an adverse action, meaning an unfavorable interest in approving the potential tenant. An example of an adverse action is as the following. 1. Declining applications. 2. Requiring potential tenants to have a cosigner for a lease. 3. Requiring a deposit for a potential tenant and not for another tenant. 4. Raising the rent to a higher amount for a potential tenant and for another tenant. 5. Requiring a larger amount from a potential tenant for the deposit than the actual required amount from another tenant. Landlord taking an adverse action. After a landlord has taken an adverse action, the landlord is responsible for a notice of fact by orally, in writing, or electronically of the disapproval. As a landlord, a written notice is evidence that you are following the FCRA, Fair Credit Reporting Act, guidelines by the Federal Trade Commission. Now that you've been enlightened about tenant background checks, tenant credit reports, and criminal search. In this video was shared procedures and techniques to aid landlords in their research of making a sound decision. Before running background and criminal history reports, landlords should be asking potential tenants pre-screening questions. By doing the process, the strategy would save time and money into conducting a full screen-out search. If landlord decided to hire a tenant screening service, save money on collecting data from future renter credit and criminal report. When approving a potential tenant with data of documented credit or criminal history reports, choosing to take an adverse action as a landlord. As a result, the landlord is responsible for notice given to the potential tenant for making that decision. If you liked the video, please give us a thumbs up below, comment below, and don't forget to subscribe for more fascinating videos.